Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Momentum's online event, Migrating Your Business to the Cloud. Really happy that you've joined us this morning. My name's Al Emery, Managing Director at Momentum Software Solutions. And we're really excited to talk to you about some of what we've learned in terms of migrating your business to the cloud. And you'll find in the content that we're not just talking about accounting software or ERP. We want to give a holistic view to you about what that entails. So next slide, please, Morgan. Just a couple of quick friendly reminders on web meeting etiquette. I'm sure you've all attended various meetings, but online, but they work best if you do mute your microphone. That way there's no background noise coming through the chat whilst the speakers are presenting. We do encourage questions, so please feel free, and you can use the raise your hand feature if you have a question, or alternatively, you can use the chat box as well. So the agenda this morning is an introduction from me, and then we're going to move on to what, why, when, and how. So we're talking about cloud migration. Why would you listen to people at Momentum about cloud migration? What makes us experts? I guess a few things. Firstly, we're very heavily involved in cloud software. We also have a team of people with very broad business experience, not just accounting or ERP software, who've done all kinds of projects in all kinds of businesses, including myself. You'll find most of the people presenting today have grey hair like myself or no hair. So that should be telling you we have lived experience, and I'll talk about some of that myself. So next, first up, we're going to have Peter Jeffrey, our Business Development Manager, talking to you about what is cloud migration. So what does it entail? Then moving on from Peter, we have David Wallace, our Customer Success Manager, and he's, I guess, going to fill you in on why would you or why should you do it? What are the benefits? I'm going to talk to you about a bit of the how, and some of that's reflecting back on our own experience moving from a completely on-premise scenario to pure cloud. And then we have Brian James, our Business Development Manager, who's going to be talking to you about MYOB Advanced, which is the cloud ERP offering from MYOB that most businesses are moving to these days. So without further ado, just touch on, I guess, some of our credentials. Cloud ERP is pretty much all we do. Nobody is buying on-premise ERP software anymore. We do have a considerable client base using a couple of different cloud ERP solutions, as well as our more established customers using MYOB XO, which is on-premise. And businesses in that situation are often now, faced with the decision as what to do next. So we have over 230 customers right around Queensland and all around Australia, in fact, and we've been doing this for 15 years plus. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Peter Jeffrey now. Peter's our Business Development Manager, and he's going to be talking to you about what is cloud migration. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Al. So, as Al mentioned, a lot of businesses are now faced with a situation where they've had on-premise software for many years and are looking to refresh. And a lot of the offerings, or pretty much all of the offerings on the market at the moment, are cloud-based applications. So according to Forrester, about half of businesses have moved over to cloud so far. So there's still a long way to go, as is obviously evidenced by you all being on this webinar. Next one, Morgan. In terms of explaining what cloud migration means, I thought I would compare it to the music industry. So back in the day, we all went to the record shop and bought records if we wanted to listen to music from our favourite bands. We built up our record collection, took them home, put them in a cabinet next to the hi-fi, which was the capital equipment that we needed to be able to play the records on and listen to the music. We'd have to maintain that to some degree by changing the stylus every now and again, and the records would get scratched or warped or the music would bounce, but that was all right. We could live with that. Along came cassettes and CDs, and the Sony Walkman meant that we were mobile. We weren't tied to our living rooms to be able to listen to music. We could listen to it while we were out on the bus or in the car. But that meant we had to carry part of our collection around with us as well. But we were still going to the record shop and buying music. Revolutionary iPod came along, which meant we could put all of our music through a digital transformation and have it on one device that could go with us anywhere we wanted to go. We didn't have to listen to it CD by CD or record by record anymore. We could just press shuffle, and it made the listening to music experience really quite different. More importantly, we no longer had to go to the record shop to physically buy anything. We could download it and buy it from the Apple Store, which made everything so much more convenient. Along came smartphones, which meant that we no longer needed the iPad. We put all of our music onto smartphones. So we narrowed it down from having to carry around two devices to a single device and do everything that we needed to on that one device. But we were still buying music through Google Play or the App Store. To change it all, next slide, Morgan. To change everything, along came Spotify. We no longer own music. We subscribe to it. We have music as a service. We have somebody else looking after our music collection on their hardware and on their equipment. They're looking after the quality of that music. They're backing it up. They're adding to the library. And that library is far greater than anything that I could have possibly have bought myself. But because of my subscription to that, I get to access it. They're using technologies such as artificial intelligence to be able to suggest new music and new artists to me that I may never have heard of before based on my listening experience. So the whole music experience has moved. I no longer have music on my phone. I subscribe to it and I stream it either on my phone, my laptop, my TV, in the car, any device that's got a browser and internet access. And that's really what cloud migration is all about. Next one, Morgan. So following through that analogy, the big grey column to the left of this slide, that's my record collection and record players. It's your server in your server room in your office with XO sitting on it, and you need to be in the office to be able to access that. You can start that migration by putting it onto somebody else's server, which is essentially like the iPod. So it runs out of somebody else's data center. They're responsible for maintaining that data center, managing the storage, but it's still your software. Taking that a step further, putting it all onto a single platform as a service. So they're now managing everything underneath the application, from operating systems, any sort of connectivity software as well. Still your software. Right through to software as a service, which is the Spotify. So this is where everything is on somebody else's servers, somebody else's hardware, somebody else is managing the whole process, doing all the backups for you, doing all of the upgrades for you, maintaining everything on that software, making sure that your data is in good working order. You don't own the application anymore. You subscribe to it on a monthly subscription basis, and you consume the software. And in doing that, you get access to a much broader range of software functionality than you probably would have done with on-premise. So might be a sort of a simplistic analogy as to how to migrate to the cloud, taking it from records through to Spotify. But essentially, that's what we're doing. We're going away from capital expenditure to operational expenditure and consuming through subscription. And with that, I'm going to hand over to David.
Thanks, Pete. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Yeah, David Wallace is my name. I'm the Customer Success Manager at Momentum. Just to share a little bit of personal background to give some relativity to what I'm going to talk about. I was 25 years plus as the CFO and global CIO for a medium to large enterprise based in Brisbane, the US and Europe. So I come from more of a commercial background. Adding to that, as part of that role, I would attend significant Microsoft conferences, generally held for a global audience, but held in Las Vegas every year. And I remember in 2012, Microsoft would always have a theme. There was one year there was a theme that it was all about the ribbon and the changes of Office 365 products and the ribbon. The next time we went, though, however, it was all about the cloud. In fact, everyone invented a drinking game to say that every time Microsoft mentioned the cloud, you had to have another beer. So that's the type of conference that was. I had a few of my infrastructure team at those conferences and my application teams at those conferences. And at that particular one, they used to come up to me and say, "This is the way of the future. This is where we're going." I'm talking 10 years ago now. And I would quickly go back to them and say, why would I go to the cloud when I can ring you buggers in a nightclub in the valley at 3 a.m. to come out and fix my servers, et cetera, et cetera. Because I relied on service, I relied on continuity, and being able to pick up the phone to my own team was critical. I'm now 100% a cloud subscriber. And hopefully the next few slides will give you that convince you as to why I've made that decision in business and why most other businesses are following suit. But it did take me a while to warm to it. So this is a pretty comprehensive bespoke diagram of reasons or benefits for going to the cloud. I'm not going to go through each one of those. What I'm going to try and present is something that's probably a little bit more practical to all of this audience and a little bit have a little bit more meaning. I am going to overlap on a few things that what Peter just said, which is, but I'll deep dive those in a little bit more detail. All right, so you've got two sides of this slide. You've got your on-premise architecture or situation, and on the right you've got your cloud situation. So I think we can all relate to that picture of the server rack. We all had or have, perhaps in the stationary room or somewhere where it's a little bit out of the way, or even a special room that's built for servers. We've all got that rack with all of those servers, etc. And some businesses even have separate servers for Active Directory, managing their Exchange, managing their databases, managing their files. Back in my day in small business, we used to use Small Business Server from Microsoft, which had a flavor of each of those, fortunately on one server. But some businesses have to have a different have a different device to manage all of those applications. Then as the owner of an on-premise architecture, you've obviously got responsibility for disaster recovery. You're managing your own backups and restores. If I could see you, I'd like to see a show of hands of how many of you or your receptionists or someone in the office, the finance person, actually takes a tape home in their bag each night so that you've got an off-site backup. I'd also like to ask each of you to ask yourselves, when was the last time you actually tested the ability to restore from those tapes? I mean, they have a use life, those sorts of things. I mean, it's all well and good to walk away each night knowing that you've got a backup in the handbag or in the briefcase, and if something happened while you're asleep, you could restore your business. But a lot of businesses that I meet, when I ask them, have you actually tested that you can do that? The answer is no. You've obviously, in some cases, server rooms had fire protection, other disaster recovery architecture around them. More sophisticated businesses that could afford that did that. Otherwise, the servers racks were just in and out of the way area that was protected from being bumped and harmed. And obviously, you were responsible for your own security around your information. The third area of responsibility for an on-premise solution is that you're managing redundancy and reducing single points of failure. So you might have a UPS or a backup battery supply to combat power outages, which are quite frequent, definitely here in southeast Queensland, storms, etc. Even power surges, which are more frequent in those storms. And some of you may have other N+1 solutions. You might have redundant servers, failover servers, things like that in your architecture. That was a pretty comprehensive architecture to manage. If you were fortunate enough to have an in-house person, fantastic. If you outsourced it to a specialist IT company, it worked for us. It certainly did work for us, but there is a new way, and the reduction to go into the cloud as an example of just the basics that you need by way of IT infrastructure. Most businesses can cope just by having just an internet router. You'll have the NBN or whatever coming into your building. It'll attach to the router, and then obviously you'll have Wi-Fi distribution around your own office, and then that's going straight out to your devices, whether it be laptops, tablets, phones, desktops, etc., via Ethernet or via Wi-Fi. And generally speaking, you've got cloud solutions now that replace a lot of those servers. So as far as the server rack solutions are concerned, we've now got choices of Microsoft Azure, AWS, and quite a few others in that space where they do Active Directory or manage the users to your system via the cloud. You don't need an Active Directory server any longer. You've got cloud database management systems that offer new technologies such as data lakes, data warehouses, and for the more sophisticated office, artificial intelligence, machine learning, those sorts of things. And that's all in the cloud. To put a SQL server on premise to do all that now is just not economically rational. Then you've got your cloud applications such as your email/Exchange. You've got file servers effectively in the cloud with a combination of Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, just to stick with the Microsoft terminology, but you've got others with AWS, Google, etc. And then obviously you've got desktop applications like Excel, Word, and they're easily deployed onto the end device and or used via a portal or a web browser accessing the cloud. As far as redundancy is concerned, some of you may scoff when I talk about the MPN. Don't worry, I'm not trying to sell their services. They need to improve, but you do have the option to select carriers. If you're very reliant on the cloud, and if someone chops a cable out the back of Warwick, and that brings down, say, the Optus network, you may have a failover to go to Telstra as well. You might just have a little account sitting on the side that you could invoke the Telstra connection. The other option is most devices now will operate through the 5G, 4G wireless network, the mobile network. I'm sure we've all hotspotted someone's phone at some stage, so you can still access the cloud via that. And then coming into the picture now and getting cheaper by the day is Mr. Musk's Starlink. And if you've ever seen those satellites go across the sky in the morning without knowing what they are, it'll scare the bejesus out of you. But it's amazing technology, and it is getting cheaper by the day. I think now I saw a home solution advertised for $135 a month. Well, that's expensive, but if you live in the back of Longreach, it's cheap as chips. So coverage and connectivity is expanding by the day. Thanks, Morgan. Next slide. Just continuing on with that, subscription licensing is the new way for cloud software purchasing. In general, prior to this, we purchased our software up front, whether it be Exchange Server, whether it be even Microsoft Excel. or any of the other Office products. I think Excel in those days, 10 years ago, was like $300, $400 for a license of Excel. But for things like Active Directory, SQL, Exchange, and most ERP solutions that were on premise, you would pay an upfront cost. Let's say it was $20,000 for the license for the software, and that would give you a subscription for named users, but now, sorry to digress there. But now you have the option to use named users, or counts of users, or even data flow, or data volume, such as in the case of Azure. And you have the ability, as resources come and go, we can now reassign licenses to our incoming resources or additional resources very quickly and very easily. Continuing on, so that's the subscription licensing. Sorry, I was moving a bit ahead of myself there. Next one, please, Morgan. In the past, also, when we made that capital purchase of that software, we generally then had to pay, somewhere between 10 to 20% or more, in some cases, of an annual fee for they used to call that software assurance and maintenance. What that delivered for us is, having the ability to upgrade, having the ability for any minor bug fixes to be deployed to our on-premise solution. If you didn't pay that annual maintenance, you didn't get it. And generally companies who thought that wasn't necessary went many versions backwards, and it was very, very hard to catch up. So nowadays, though, for many of the current cloud applications, minor and major updates and upgrades are pushed out automatically for the end user with little or no IT involvement, because that assurance fee is now generally included in the subscription fee. It's all part and parcel. As Pete mentioned, you can transition from a CapEx to an OpEx model. I'm not a tax advisor, but as there are some cash flow considerations there, mostly beneficial. I will show you a slide at the end of some papers you can read regarding some incentives to move to the cloud from the federal government and the ATO. And look, as I mentioned earlier, major and minor updates can be pushed out with little involvement. In fact, sometimes it's happening while you're asleep. It's happening, you don't even know it's happening for some applications. Next slide, please, Morgan. All right, just going back a little bit, when I was making this test, this decision to transition, a relatively large business to the cloud, I called it the sleep test. I actually asked myself, how much sleep would I lose worrying about my on-premise solution for disaster and redundancy versus the same considerations if I was to have to move to cloud solutions. I'll give you some scenarios here. You're in your house on a Saturday or your office and you're trying to do a critical proposal. You generally won't have IT support from your local team, but generally speaking, you may find it hard these days also to get cloud support. But what I'm trying to say there is that they're equal. So it's not a decision factor anymore, because you have the option. Where it does get beneficial is that if you do go down with a cloud solution, it's generally affecting a hell of a lot more people than just you. So there's a commercial incentive for the cloud software service provider, to assemble a team or get the team cracking to get a more urgent response, because with social media and that these days, they certainly don't want to have too much publicity on downtime or issues, so they will assemble a team faster. Generally speaking, the teams that support cloud applications are specialists, specialists in their solution and specialists in the way it's deployed out to its end users, rather than generalists. I mentioned earlier, you got those IT team people working for you. They knew a little bit about Exchange Server, Active Directory Server. They were very good at having general knowledge across everything. Your IT organization's the same thing, but now it's much more specialized. And generally, I'm finding troubleshooting and resolution to issues is generally quicker and more accurate. By the way, on that, the amount of times that there is an incident that requires troubleshooting and resolution over the past 4 or 5 years has diminished significantly. So, they've got their act together. And the cloud vendors will take on a global standard in maintaining security and uptime. You generally get a higher level of certainty around security. I am apologising to Optus customers right here, but the around general business applications, they have the ability to protect your data and secure your data on a global basis, and generally that standard applies to everyone, even us here in Australia, irrespective of where that software is being served on a server. And just on that, guys, at the end of the day, this application is still on a server somewhere, whether it be in Singapore, whether it be in Sydney, and those servers are getting more and more populated around, particularly in Australia. When all this started, we generally were going out to servers in Singapore because the vendors didn't have the economy of scale to introduce data centers and cloud-based data centers in Australia, but that's changing, and it's changing by the day. So we are experiencing better service, better rates of speed across the internet because we are not traversing the Pacific or the Timor Sea or whatever the case may be going into Asia. Although it is still an area of improvement and some companies still have a long way to go with this, but support can follow the sun. In other words, they can offer a 24/7 support model so that when you're awake in Australia, you're probably getting support from Hong Kong or Australia or Singapore, and then even if you're after hours, that support's probably moved on to an Indian time zone or a European time zone, and then a US time zone as the Earth spins. Still not perfect, but getting better. Thanks, Morgan. Next slide. Just some cookie cutter slides here. Won't dwell on it too much, but there has been surveys conducted. In this case, it was Forrester on some of the stats around the impact on business moving to the cloud. Rather than just give you the statement of what they are in these stats, I can say across all of those statistics, they are on the upward trend. They are improving each 6 months when they do these surveys, or each 12 months. There's been a continual improvement without any reduction in the statistics. Next, please, Morgan. I mentioned earlier there are some current incentives with the ATO as far as additional business deductions are concerned. As I said, I'm not a tax advisor, but you may have internal people who know more than I, and or your external tax accountant. I think that's pretty much it for me, Morgan. Yeah. So I'll hand over to. See, I was the silver-haired guy with diminishing hair. Now I hand over to the guy with just silver hair.
Thanks, David. And I think just to reiterate on a couple of David's points there, there's a growing body of evidence that businesses running in a cloud environment are more competitive for various reasons. A key one is they're more flexible and they're more scalable. So when you're in an environment where most of what you're consuming is subscription based, it's very easy to grow because you just add a few more licenses or add a bit more capacity, and it's really the vendor or the platform's problem. Whereas when you're on premise, for example, if you purchase or deploy a new server, you probably have to get one that's initially too big for what you need because you want it to last for 3 years, say, or 5 years. So at first it's too big for you, and in the middle it's the right size, and at the end it's starting to slow down and become redundant, so then it's too small. And you can apply that example to software, documents and storage, whatever you're using digitally or consuming digitally. If you're running in a cloud environment, you pay a little bit more because it's more licenses or more storage or more of something, but it happens very quickly and it's very easy to do, and it's often quite easy to scale back down as well if needed. So I'm going to talk about a bit of the how, and I guess in terms of just framing what I want to get across is not the technical how, but more so the practical how. So I guess the first thing around connecting and undertaking a cloud migration is to understand why, and hopefully David's given you some information around that. Why would you? Why should you? And then you've got to make a decision, right? So you have to decide. If you decide, then you need to decide what. So what are you going to do first, second, third, fourth, fifth? Is it my email, Microsoft applications? Is it my files and document storage? Is it my business applications? And over time, it's probably all of it, but generally speaking, you wouldn't do it all at once. Usually not a great idea. So you need to decide what. Have a bit of a plan of how you would schedule that. So when, what things first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Who are you going to engage with, both internally and externally, to deliver those projects? So each one of them is a project, and I'll touch in a bit more detail on some of the key aspects of those projects. And once you've decided who, they'll help you with the how, right? So your IT provider might be your incumbent, who can easily get you up and running in a hosted server or an Azure or AWS platform, or quite easily migrate your email from an on-premise Exchange server, for example, to Office 365. So they'll help you with the how, and when it comes to ERP, that's what we do, of course. Once you've decided on the how, then it's a little bit of the what. So you've got a bit of a picture in front of you. Some of those are applications, some of them are platforms. And these are common ones. So you've got your Microsoft Teams, and I'll touch on that in a little bit more detail. You've got your Office 365, all the various different Office 365 applications, and just making sure you get on the right subscription so that you have all of the applications that you want or need. Can be a bit of a minefield. There's lots of layers of Microsoft subscription models. Smartsheet is a really nice project management, project scheduling, again, cloud-based, similar to MS Project, but also similar to Excel, so easy to adopt. Slack and Jira, generally speaking, collaboration tools, project management tools. AWS is your Amazon Web Services, and for example, MYOB Advanced is hosted on the AWS platform in Australia. And Azure, which is the Microsoft equivalent of their cloud platform, where all of their applications live and breathe, and where you can also use for cloud-based servers, document storage, etc. And the other ERP that MYOB, that Momentum is involved with, called Business Central, is running on that Azure stack. And then you've got your cloud ERP, which would usually be your main operating system that you use for not just financials, but projects, CRM, inventory, etc. So phases that you would go through, obviously you need to evaluate what you're going to move to the cloud and what platform or solution or application you're going to use. So that's step one. Planning is next, so you need to have a realistic time frame in mind. You need to understand what are the steps to get from A to Z for that platform or application. Understanding that in a lot of cases, you're not simply moving what you have now and how you do it and replicating it identically. Many things might need changes, and some of them are quite significant. So preparation, people, data, environments ready to migrate. And people, that includes the change management aspect, so you can really create a tile for that on its own. So communication is very key. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What's the benefit? So your team obviously want to understand the why, not just the we're doing this message. We feel that's very important in a successful outcome, that people actually quickly adapt to and adopt the new tools they might be using. tests. So particularly the cutover from one platform or application, needs to be managed from a risk perspective, so that you might do a trial migration either of documents or data or applications. Make sure that they are working in your new environment without cutting over yet, so that you have redundancy. If it doesn't work, there's a problem. We keep using what we're using. And when we are, let's say, we're never 100% confident, but let's say 99.5% confident that what we're moving to works, the data transitions relatively seamlessly, we know what we have to do on that cutover day or the next day or the next week, so that you're not put in a position of having massive business disruption. That's the main thing we don't want. And then you execute your migration. So sometimes that's a quick thing. In other cases, it might actually take weeks or months. And I'll circle back to that one and talk about documents and SharePoint and Teams as a use case scenario that we've done ourselves. And then your successful launch is, triaging, repeating some messages, making sure that people understand what to do, where to go, how to log on, quick tips and that sort of stuff. So we bring the helpfulness on steroids to the table, so that because people receive messages at different times, not everything's retained, so we can never expect all people are going to know what to do or do what we ask them to do immediately. So a lot of reminding, touching base, and helping people through that transition. Because in all of our businesses, we've got people who are early adopters, people who will come on the journey when it's the right time, and probably a few people who are a bit more change averse or reticent or have forgotten or are just too busy. And so we need to help different people through those phases. So you could apply that methodology to any project in reality, but it's particularly important when we're doing that cloud migration. So I'll just touch on our journey and what we've done over probably 6 or 7 years. So initially, completely on-premise, had our own server in our own office. All of our documents and files were on it. Our email was running on the same server. It might have been a separate server, but also on-premise. We used locally installed Excel and Word, etc. EXO was our ERP. We had an external IT company that were regularly on site doing break fix help. If we needed to access remotely, we could do that for a remote desktop, but mobility was somewhat limited because you needed good connectivity in the field. You couldn't use a mobile device. It was a laptop or a computer. We then went what I call hosted, but you would define as private cloud. So we moved everything into an off-site data center, including our documents and files, and that was actually a physical portable hard drive that we copied them all to, drove it down to Brisbane and restored them there. That's how it was done at the time. Exchange was moved from on-premise to Exchange on the hosted server, and we later went Office 365. Office was running on that server, so we tended to use our Office products within the remote desktop session on the server. We moved EXO to that server. We still had external IT, but they rarely needed to come on site because the only local problems we had might have been with the odd printer or hardware issue, and generally speaking, that's all done remotely now anyway. Backups, disaster recovery, and flexibility improved dramatically, as David alluded to earlier. We still needed to use remote desktop, so mobility was better because the internet pipe into that building was fibre compared to what we had with our own on-premise platform. And then ultimately, public cloud or pure cloud, so documents and files on SharePoint and therefore also Teams. Email and communications all through Office 365 and Teams. Office 365, where you can now run in the browser or run local. But that was a learning experience because many of the browser versions of the Office software, like Excel, for example, are still somewhat cut down in functionality compared to the installed version. Cloud ERP being advanced, so we moved our data from EXO, trained ourselves, and started using our cloud product. Very little IT assistance needed, generally speaking. Backups, DRP, and flexibility improved even more so because we've got Amazon MYOB with that protective layer around it that provides even more security and scalability. All now browser access or mobile app, so very easy. Next slide, thanks, Morgan. So I guess what did we learn from doing that? And I want to talk about SharePoint and Teams briefly, and you could be using Google Drive or Box, etc. Is if you just simply move your files and folders, how they're stored now on your folder to SharePoint, and not implement taxonomy, you're probably doing that wrong, to be blunt. Cloud document storage allows you to add taxonomy, which is basically search terms and tags on documents to help describe what type of document it is, what department or function it relates to. You can go even levels deeper. So in our case, we tag them, what software do they relate to? And also other search words that people might use that don't directly match the name of that file. So we spent literally months on our taxonomy, tagging our documents. It's still not perfect. The difference is instead of, browsing through folders, looking for things in a cloud environment, which you can do, but generally it's less efficient. You enter a few words into the same search box and you'll get, a very compressed hit list of results, which you can then tick a few extra boxes and refine and find the document you need and then start interacting with it. So if you're looking at implementing SharePoint, do taxonomy. If the people implementing SharePoint for you don't mention it, they should, and you should definitely ask. The other learning that we had is when we implemented Teams, we made a conscious decision not to ban, but dramatically reduce email as an internal communication tool. So we started insisting on chats within Teams. We have various teams set up so that we could quickly collaborate and easily collaborate, but not have to deal with all the admin that email provides. So if you receive an email from someone, even if it's internal, it's sitting there in your inbox, you have to do something with it to get rid of it. So you either need to reply to it, file it, decide where to file it, or delete it. If you do a chat in Teams, you reply, done, that's it. So if you think about the steps involved in dealing with an email versus replying to a chat, it probably takes 3 or 4 times as long to respond to an email and then file it or delete it or do something with it or forward it, versus a well-structured, monitored chat. So we try to use emails for customer-facing communications, external, very little internal communication. So that's a process change, not just an application change. The other thing we learned is that YouTube is your friend for good practice. How do I use some of the tools that are now available to me? We learned a lot about Teams, in fact, and SharePoint by watching YouTube videos from experts. You have to be careful who is an expert, but it's definitely your friend. The other thing we did and we suggest is, as far as your procedure documentation, how you do things internally, operationally, admin, creating an HTML knowledge base rather than, say, a library of Word documents, also becomes more efficient. And lastly, ERP is our space, and we've got many customers, including ourselves, who've moved from an on-premise ERP, in our case EXO, to advanced. Is generally speaking, your cloud ERP that you might move to is not the same as your on-premise ERP that you possibly are using now. It's very rare that they're the same. So it's a new kettle of fish. You need to learn it. You firstly need to make sure that the functionality suits your needs, more so than whether it's cloud-based or not. So any application that you're thinking of using needs to actually meet your functional requirements, and they're all a bit different. So there's a lot of similarities between ERPs, but there's also strengths and weaknesses, particularly in industry verticals as well, that you should really have a deep dive into and not assume that they're the same. And so this is an example of a SharePoint taxonomy. So if you've seen this and done this, then apologies for telling you how to suck eggs. There's a lot of documentation around how to do it, but a good SharePoint advisor, consultant, this should be their bread and butter. So on the left, we've got a Word template that we use for some of our proposals. It's got a name, and that name is searchable. But you can add to that all the different tags that I described. So we have what's called a content type. So is it a sales asset, or is it a communications asset, for example? Some documents are more than one thing, and that solves the problem that you might have with folders. For example, if you've got folders for different departments, some documents are used by multiple departments. So where do you put them then? Taxonomy solves that problem. So you can have friendly search terms, and when you then search, you can, on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the word I've searched, and then I can just simply tick on some of the filters on the left to refine my search down to, is it a Word document or a PDF, for example? Is it a template, or is it a presentation? Does it relate to our MYOB software or some other software? And your search list shrinks, and the document appears in front of your eyes for you to then open, use very quickly. So taxonomy requires quite a bit of time and effort to get right, but it's time well spent in our view. So I think I've mostly covered, I guess, some of the practical learnings we've had in how migration to the cloud can work. And there's obviously a few risks. So internet speed, you don't need fiber into your building. You need reasonable internet speed, but more importantly, you need reliable internet speed and probably some redundancy. Most cloud applications, cloud in general is a good example of how software companies and platform companies do more with less. So for example, watching a video in ADSL days, most people wouldn't bother because it was horrendous. And in a lot of cases, you've still got copper into your house, but you can watch any video anytime you like because of compression technology. The pipe didn't get much bigger. And a lot of cloud applications are designed with that in mind. So they're not too graphically intensive, so that I can hotspot my phone and do most things on most of the applications we use, or just about anything really, other than very graphically intensive things where I probably wouldn't bother. There's possible legal restrictions for data in the cloud for certain organisations, but generally speaking, cloud applications for Australia are hosted in Australia, on Australian or in Australian data centres, and therefore protected by Australian data sovereignty laws. That used to be an issue historically where, for example, Office 365 was not hosted in Australia, it was in Singapore or in the US. So you can be subject to other countries' data sovereignty laws, which are not the same as ours, but generally speaking, most of the more common platforms are hosted in Australia for Australian customers these days. Lack of knowledge, again, so not making assumptions that everything's the same, not assuming that you'll do everything the same way you were, are important things to understand. And incompatibility of existing architecture. Maybe you've got some old PCs running Windows 7. You would need to deal with those. So that's me. So hopefully I've covered some practical learning on migrating to the cloud, not just from an ERP perspective, but all of those key business applications that businesses tend to use. And so over to Brian with an introduction on MYOB Advanced Cloud ERP. Thanks, BJ.
Thanks, Al and gentlemen, Peter and David. I'm Brian James, the another business development manager up here on the Sunshine Coast. I remember Peter having 8-track tapes back in the day and server rooms, building up server rooms back in the old country. So I've been around the tracks a few times. The last session here, I'm going to introduce you to MYOB Advanced, which is the MYOB's cloud-based enterprise resource planning system, ERP, which Momentum are selling, implementing, supporting, and putting in along with the Microsoft Wise version. All right, so now all convinced to go cloud. Now use the ERP system to get your business up and going on the cloud. So MYOB Advanced is the fastest growing #1 ERP solution out there. It's, as I say, a customizable platform, monthly pricing, talking about software as a service, SaaS, so you pay by the month for each user. Flexibility, work where you want to do, and from where you want to work as well. Mobile devices, laptops, computers, etc. Anywhere you get internet access, you access MYOB Advanced. It's based on Acumatica, being a package out of the USA, based in Seattle. So MYOB Advanced is the license name here in Australia and New Zealand for Acumatica. Next slide, please, Morgan. All right, so MYOB Advanced, it covers most aspects of every business. All right, so an ERP system, that's the idea. So basically, going around the circle, you just have stuff like CRM, customer relationship management, opportunities and leads, but the workforce management side of it, going into construction, BI being business intelligence reporting, stock control, distribution, again, payroll, as you expect, projects, service management, i.e. field service, financial management, as you expect, then manufacturing, the mobile stuff, and again, a whole bunch of add-on integrations to go with it, stuff like Shopify and Salesforce, etc., Outlook, and so on. Next slide, please, Morgan. Yeah, all right. So there's the 5 basic, main pillars of MYOB Advanced around the financial management side, going into the customer management, CRM of it, the stock side of it, project accounting, and of course the platform. So on the financial side, as you would expect, it's got the GL, debtors, creditors, cash book, etc., etc. You've got the reporting side of it, financial statements, ultimate report writer. It's got tools for doing analysis and budgeting and planning, multi-currency, multi-entity, multi-company, and supports complex structures. On the customer management side, allows you to look after all your customer-facing transactions with quoting, going through the sales, post-sale support, information, consolidation across a whole bunch of dashboards, again, reports around it. The stock side is a very powerful stock control system in MYOB Advanced, recording different locations, warehouses. You've got tracking of serial numbers and batch numbers. You've got advanced features being kit assemblies, bin locations, picking, different options of picking, multi-locations, multi-customer pricing, very powerful indeed. On the project side of things, you've got stuff, project management, i.e. job costing, that covers the construction side of it, also manufacturing. So you have projects out there you can control with quoting and timesheets being booked against it, employees and subcontractors interfacing with the projects, bill of materials for the manufacturing side going on the project as well. And again, all locations, multi-currency, revenues, budgets, reporting, all against it. All this based on the Amazon Web Services, AWS again, based in Sydney. That's where it's all partnered, and MYOB takes care of everything around the entire system. Thanks, Morgan. The payroll side of MYOB Advanced, called Advanced People. All right, so there's a payroll side of it. So obviously that's been developed by MYOB here in Australia, because it's Australian payroll as opposed to the Acumatica one. And it's a in-depth, powerful payroll system around flexible payroll, good reporting around it. It's got employee self-service. Right. Next slide, please, Morgan. More breakdown on the payroll itself. So basically you've got on the left-hand side your advanced people functionality. So the payroll, and then the reporting side. So the payroll itself's got leave calculations, terminations, timesheet uploads, the ATO link, STP links, holidays, superannuation, as you expect. A vast array of reports around those things. On the right-hand side, the mobile app then allows you, like I said, employees to log on and pick up pay slips, do the pay distribution, look at leave balances, leave requests, contact details, etc. There's a further module called Workforce Management, which MYOB are developing. It's allowing you for onboarding, and then again, time capture as well, timesheets, rostering, and time and attendance. Allows then to have your employees be the mobile app linked to the payroll system. Next slide, please, Morgan. So a bit more on workforce management. So the workforce management, like I say, it's been underdeveloped, it's been released, it's out there. It's got stuff like the onboarding is very powerful. So basically, onboard, your email would go to a prospective employee saying you've been selected to work for us, fill in the following forms, attach your documents, your license, your blue card, etc., upload it. That then comes back into the system and updates payroll automatically. Then from there, you've got the rostering side of things, and again, leave management, you've got self-service, the timesheet entry by the employees, and linked to that then, of course, the BI again, reporting. There's a award rules engine in the system being developed as well. And again, document management for a basic HR side of it. Thanks, Morgan. Most of our clients we've worked with in the past would have a setup like this. They'll be running, say, maybe a Countright and Xero or something else, a whole bunch of Excel spreadsheets, a whole bunch of add-ons on their system. So it'll all be very disparate, so not designed, it's limited reporting, it's not on the cloud, some on the cloud, some off the cloud. Mobility is a challenge, and trying to run a system like that is a lot of workarounds, a lot of time spent duplicating, handling the same data 3, 4, 5 times. Next slide, please, Morgan. So once you go with MYOB Advanced or Cloud ERP solution, you can have basically all come together into a connected business, all one system, one source of the truth, accessed anywhere, anytime, internet access, costs are reduced, all taken care of using the SaaS, software as a service solution. Thanks, Morgan. And again, because it's cloud-based, you can access anywhere. As long as you have a browser, you can access the system through mobiles, Androids, iPhones, iPads, any laptop, Surface Pro, etc. And again, linking back to Office 365, any cloud application, so basically all one system on the cloud, accessed anywhere. And the final one is, so why would you go to MYOB Advanced? Basically, you're moving from the grey area to the white area, one system, one source of the truth, automation, increase productivity, efficiencies, make life easier, and basically it's all one system for the future. And that would be why you would go ERP MYOB Advanced. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. So this morning we've talked about cloud migration in general, and Peter, I think, has given you a very good description of what that means. David has followed on from there and covered why you might do it, what are the benefits, and some of the risks. I've talked about, from a practical, real-life example perspective, how you go about it. And then we've had Brian with our introduction to MYOB Advanced, Cloud, ERP, and Payroll. So we thank you all for joining us this morning. We're very happy to take any questions or feedback you may have. So if you do unmute yourself and fire away, or pop something into the chat, and we'll answer as best we can.
There's a question there, Alvin, typed.
Okay, so the question is recommendations for cloud-based financial management only software. So assuming we're talking about accounting software, Lynn, and not ERP. And I think the answer to that question depends mostly on size and complexity of business. So in the small business realm, you've got your MYOB, I think it's now called MYOB Business, used to be called MYOB Essentials, which is, unlike AccountRight, is a pure browser-based small business package, somewhat similar to Xero. So they'd be the two leading players from a small business perspective. In the larger business perspective, you can implement an ERP like Advanced or Microsoft Business Central and just use the financial part of it. And we have a number of customers doing that. Okay, looks like no more questions. So we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much for attending, everybody, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.